Sakyamunye Soha Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam Lai Janchu Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Janchu Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapso Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Spesso
Very often, when someone gets close, wants to know more about Buddhism, one of the first questions that they ask is Buddhism a religion or not? It's one of the classic questions. And even recently, a study was done on the diffusion of Buddhism in Italy, done by the University of Padua. And I was looking at this study, and one of the questions that was asked was, when you think about Buddhism, what comes to your mind? Philosophy, religion? Only 18% of the people considered it a religion. And a question comes to me when we ask if Buddhism is a religion or not. The first question is, what is a religion? Because we're talking and I say yes and you say no, I say yes, you say no, or we both say yes, we both say no, and maybe we're thinking about two totally different things, because the same words don't necessarily mean the same thing. So my question is, what do we mean by religion? And I remember finding myself at an interreligious meeting, and one of the subjects was a common factor among all religions is that we all believe in a religion and we all have dogmas. I didn't raise my hand at that time because I didn't want to open up this debate, but we're not a theist religion. We don't base ourselves on one God, and there are no dogma in Buddhism. There's nothing in Buddhism that we cannot explain. It's never been said this is like this, like it's because it is. Some answers require time to understand them. Can't understand everything immediately, but it is possible to understand. And once I was reading a book, it was actually on Tibetan medicine, and in the introduction, it said that that Buddhism is a psychological religion based not on one god or many gods, but on the inner transformation with respect to our emotions, etc. I have a view that's even it's even different to that. When we talk about religion, religion is three things put together, and the concept of religion transcends what we formally call religion. Religion is made up of three aspects: worldview. There are questions, basic questions that structure answers. Who, who am I? What's the meaning of life? Where did everything begin? What is reality? How do things work? What is happiness? What is suffering? What do I need to do to not suffer? Many aspects that are part of this view. Then there are rules of conduct. Said to live in a consistent way, to live accordingly, you need to do this and you should avoid doing that. Some have very strict rules related to the way we eat or speak, other less, but there are rules of conduct that someone who follows that view should incorporate in his daily life. And beyond the worldview and the conduct, there's a third point, which are the techniques that are transmitted to help the person along this process, adapting one's conduct and getting closer to this view. Meditation, sacred art and dance, formal techniques of meditation, the recitation of prayers, many things that one does as a tool to transform himself to have a completely consistent conduct, because it doesn't come spontaneously. When we see these three parts, the view can be very different, and we can divide the various types of views. In Tibetan, we use the term drupta. Drupta can be translated, in English, is translated as tenets. The meaning in Tibetan is when one has the total certainty of a worldview. And we have different worldviews among us, and these are the various philosophical schools, religious schools, etc. And when we study different religious schools and ancient schools, when we start studying Buddhist philosophy in a more detailed way, one of the first subjects that we look at are the different ancient religious schools, Indian schools. Gampempa, for example, that makes reference to a view where they don't believe in a god or many gods or in karma, but they believed exclusively what one could see and touch with their own senses, which is actually very close to a non-religious view of today. And it's actually put in a category of one of the ancient religions, because there's a worldview, there's a structure of the rules of conduct, the things to do, to live accordingly to this view. Today, what I wanted to do is to try to get closer somehow, how I see Buddhism through these three aspects. And if for you if for you it's a religion or not. It really depends on what you mean by religion. Maybe it's a maybe it's a philosophy that you want to integrate. Um, words are can be very we need to remember that a word is fully loaded in the sense that it means different things for different people, and it's important for us to have that understanding and understand that maybe we're saying the same thing with different words, or we're using the same word and we're saying different things. It's important to go beyond the words and understand the substance. And if we really got into looking into the worldview and conduct, we could spend days and days on this. But today I wanted to, to talk about specific aspects. When the worldviews are divided, we start with what we have in common, what all the religions and philosophical schools, even or those that don't consider themselves religious. So what do they have in common? It's as if, I mean, we could take all of humanity and we have one starting point. So this starting point that we all have in common is the aversion we have to suffering and the attraction we have for happiness. Everything we do it to try to be well, reach a sense of well-being, and avoid suffering. If we really look, for example, at all systems and all the wars, if we look at economic systems and governments, what's at the base of all that? Now, even with a war, one thinks that by killing an enemy, I'll be better off and I'll suffer less. It seems crazy in some cases, but everything that we do, all the world views that we have, all start from here. Start here. So let's start from this starting point, this strong sepa in Tibetan, this craving. We have attraction to happiness, of being well, and on the other side, we have this aversion to suffering. So it's actually one feeling that comes out in these two different feelings, but at the basis is this strong craving. And in front of this sepa craving, there there's there are two roads that we can take. So there's a first division here that is fundamental among all of these religions, whatever you want to call them. The first, we can say, the first road is mundane, worldly, and the second is spiritual. What do we mean by that? When we say that it's worldly, that worldview has the certainty that it's possible to reach our objective, eliminate suffering, and reach a state of well-being and real happiness, mostly through external and conditions that are external. This is a mundane or worldly view. I call it material utopia. When my husband will be like this, and my job will be like that, and once I will have found this, and my house will be like that, and my work will be like this, and the society will be like this, when the conditions around me will be the way I think they should be, then I'll be happy and I won't suffer. This is that first view. That materialistic view can then be divided into two. There's the part of the materialistic view that believes that it's possible to reach this in this lifetime. There's a view that says, look, if you work hard enough, if you study well and you work hard enough and you earn enough money and make the right choices and find your find your Prince Charming or your your princess, then you'll be happy. If you follow the right recipe, you'll be happy in this life. There's another that says no matter how much you try in this lifetime, you won't manage. But if you act well, if you act accordingly, after death, if you live in the right way, in this life you'll suffer. Life will be terrible in so many ways, many problems. But know that if you act, if you do the right thing, after death you can be reborn in a context where you can have everything that you want, you can avoid everything you don't want, and you can keep what you love forever. This is a concept we have of heaven, isn't it? That starts always from this view that happiness depends on external conditions. This view is something that I've seen in many religious traditions. Many religious traditions fall in this view, even within Buddhism itself, in certain contexts, certain times, or places. There's this idea um, of accumulating positive karma, avoiding negative karma. You'll be reborn in a pure land, and I just want to make sure that I'm not here pointing the finger. Maybe it's the right choice, but the first that's the first way where we believe that to avoid suffering and to be happy, we depend on external conditions. And if those external conditions are perfect, then I will be well. The second way from this crossroad that is called a spiritual way is where it's said that happiness, the view of a balanced, happy state that transcends suffering, and it's actually the term used for nirvana, the concept of nirvana, actually. Today, when we think of nirvana today, we think of either a musical group or something that has to do with Buddhism when we use the word nirvana. But the term nirvana, actually, I saw it in Tibetan when I studied, and many religions have their own nirvana. Nirvana would be the final objective of that initial desire. How can I eliminate suffering completely and reach a state of happiness and well-being, which is my main objective? So reaching that objective is called nirvana, which literally in Tibetan, nyangde, Deba, which means going beyond suffering, means transcending suffering, a state where there's no longer any suffering, a constant state of peace. This is called nirvana. So nirvana actually is not something that is specific to Buddhism, but it's something that all religions, so-called religions, those that are called religions, have. And in the materialistic view, what is the nirvana? When you've been able to create a perfect world around you that you don't have any more suffering, that's your own personal materialistic nirvana. This final state that we want to reach. And in the spiritual way, of which Buddhism is part, and there are many also other traditions that are part, to reach this state of nirvana, of peace and happiness, it's possible through mainly, not only, but mostly through an inner path of transformation. We create inner conditions and inner states of being that don't depend on external conditions. And here, the spiritual view comes into play. There's an enormous difference between that first materialistic utopia where we're constantly trying to resolve problems and put everything right around us according to how we think it should be to allow us to be happy. And the second view, we can even call it a spiritual utopia, is where I believe that it all depends mostly how I live the world around me, and not how the world is. Of course, the world that we see is a reflection of how we live it inside, because the external world is a result of the interactions of all the beings that live that reality, that interaction, and also fruit of their inner states of being. Someone could say, but if I'm surrounded by war, I'll suffer more. I totally agree. But where does war come from? External conditions, or internal in internal conditions? It comes from inside out, and it's by resolving them, the inner problems, that the outer problems are resolved. So So we learn how to interact in a healthy way with the world around us in this second spiritual utopia. We so it's more focused on us towards the world. And Buddhist view falls into this category, and we could spend hours talking about the Buddhist view. Today, I just want to uh, um, touch on it touch on it quickly, because I'd like to give emphasis on something else today. The view, in just a few words, is made up of four parts that are called the four seals, or four pillars. Because during the time of Buddha, one characteristic was that Buddha taught to different people in different ways. And there were certain things that he said to some, and to others, he said other things that were seemingly contradictory. For example, maybe to one he said, taking refuge is what you recite. You have once you say, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, you recite that many times. That's the taking of refuge. To others, he said, it's not important what you actually physically recite. What's important is what you feel inside. That's different, isn't it? But what happens is, really, the taking of refuge takes place inside. It's not what you recite, it's what you feel. But if he had said that you need to feel that, reach that inner state to certain people, they wouldn't have even started. So he said, start by reciting, and our speech directs our mind, and then little by little our mind just follows more and more to get to that point. There's an enormous job done by Lama Tsongkhapa in a text called, it was the most difficult book to write by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition. He wrote this book, and one of the masterpieces of Buddhist philosophy. Channe Lekshing Nyingpo in Tibetan. The text where Lama Tsongkhapa analyzes in a very detailed way the teachings of Buddha that should be interpreted literally, and those that should be understood in a different way. In this book, he says he said this and he meant this. He said this, and this is what he's talking. It's a quite complex book and takes years to study. But in this moment, what's interesting to us is the fact that among the many different aspects that Buddha taught, and at the death of Buddha, the disciples united and they said, he said this to me, no, he said that to me. And the various traditions and the various schools were born from that. There are four main schools: Vaibhasika, Sauntantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika. And the first school is actually divided into 18 schools, simply because there were 18 different places where Buddha gave essentially the same teaching, the monastic vows, for example. And in one context, Buddha taught in one way, in another context, he taught differently because there were different needs. For example, in one context, Buddha said, once you take vows, it's for your whole life. It's for your whole life or not at all. In other contexts, he said, you can take vows even for a specific amount of time. For a week, for a month, for 3 months, for a year, for the time you have available. In Thailand, for example, there's this tradition that monastic vows can be taken for a specific amount of time. When Buddhism came to Tibet, the king of Tibet went to a Tisha in this case and said, please don't give this tradition to us because we're too wild. Tibetans are too wild. And if you give us that liberty, he said, um, it would be the equivalent of saying one would take the vows, for the whole year, but then, the time of Carnival, for example, like they do in Brazil, would have um, would leave everything and then take them up again after this period of party. So, but of all these four schools, there are 4 points that are in common. They're called the four seals, as if one brought something. And so, if someone has these four pillars, these four stamps need to be present for it to be a Buddhist teaching. All four need to be present. What are they? The formal terms, all composed phenomenon are impermanent. Everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. All phenomenon lack their own identity and are of inherent and lack inherent existence, and beyond suffering there is peace. So what does that mean? So just going to the essence, even if it's superficial, the first one, that all composed phenomena are impermanent, means that the worldview that Buddha brought starts from the idea that everything that we interact with through our senses exists not in a way that's separate from everything else, but through a very complex network. Everything that we see, that we perceive, that we hear with our own senses, they are in constant transformation. Things transform because they interact. And within that first seal, we can find the law of karma. This first seal is the question: when I experience this, why does this happen? Why do I feel like this? These are questions that we ask ourselves. And often we don't find an answer for certain things. And the answer that Buddha gave, because causes and conditions were created. That's the answer. Maybe in other traditions would said because God wanted it like that. In Buddhism, the answer would be causes and conditions gathered and gave that result, which is that result is ripened and it was inevitable. A friend in Brazil, for example, had a terrible accident, a plane accident. For work, he went someone very far in the middle of the Amazon. And at a certain point, as it was a small plane, and the plane crashed and had to have an emergency landing, but with really without any kind of uh, warning. And luckily, in the middle of the forest, and they went from the in the middle of the forest, actually, there was a pasture and there was a little hill. So it kind of crash landed in this pasture, went up this little hill and flew even above all the cows. When they did crash, and there were some minor injuries, minor fractures, but when this man came to see me afterwards, he said, "Why did this happen?" People came to me and said, "Look, God didn't want you to die. You're lucky because God wanted to save you." And he asked me, within the Buddhist view that doesn't make reference to God, why did this accident happen and why am I still here and we're all fine? For 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 it would have been the difference of an extra minute and we wouldn't be here because crashing in the middle of the plain of the forest would have meant a certain death. And reflecting on this, this is the thought that came to me. The reason why the plane fell in that specific place and no one got seriously hurt is the same reason why you took the car this morning and you drove to work without having an accident. What's the only real difference? That when the causes and conditions and things happen according to our expectations, it's normal. When things don't go according to our expectations, if it's beautiful, it's a miracle. If it's something negative, it's a condemnation, something horrible. But actually, why did that plane fall there? For a very, very complex network of causes and conditions that interacted among themselves and brought that result. And what's interesting here is that in the same way that every instant of our lives comes out as a result of a very complex network of causes and conditions, every small action of the present moment, physical, verbal, mental, determines what is going to happen after. And here we see the law of karma. Karma means action, literally. What I'm living today is the fruit of all actions done in the past. They interact among them and together with the conditions, what I'm doing in this present moment, and also the external conditions, what others are doing, they interact, and based on that, I live a result. At the same time, everything I do constructs what will come in the future. This is one of the fundamental views of the Buddhist view. Everything that happens generated by causes and conditions that bring a result in the present moment. And so to stop on this path, one of the first fundamental steps, even though it's difficult, but stopping to victimize ourselves is essential. And we have this tendency of victimizing ourselves. When we're not well, for example, do we point the finger at someone, something? I get upset. I know I shouldn't get angry, but look what happened to me. We have this tendency to be the victim of the world somehow. And in this first point, we see no one is a victim of anyone. This doesn't take away the fact that there are actions that are extremely negative on a superficial level. We can say that there are victims, but on a deeper level, everything that happens is the fruit of a very complex network of causes and conditions that give fruit in the present moment. But this also takes us to the beauty of the power of every small action, every small thought and choice, everything we do determines what will happen in the future. And as I said before, we could spend hours going into more details, into the levels of coarse and subtle impermanence, the law of cause and effect, and karma. We could spend hours, but our main point here is that we live in a interdependent law of causes and effects, and our our actions of body, speech, and mind are constantly interacting with and constantly interacting and therefore transforming. And our free will is found in this fact that every small action creates a transformation, because wherever there's interaction, there will be transformation. This is the first seal. The second seal: everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. Sakshetamche dunalwa. When we ask ourselves, why do we suffer? The answer that we give to why we suffer spontaneously, but we're quite similar. We're not very creative. There are three reasons why we think we suffer. We think we suffer because, number one, we can't have what we want. The person doesn't act the way he should. It's not as sunny as it should be. I don't have this thing that I'd like to have. I expected it to arrive earlier, and instead it arrived late. We could give 1,000 different examples, but it's not just, we're not talking just about not having what we want materially, but we expect the world around us to be in a certain way. It's not the way we think it should be. So the first reason why we think we suffer is because we can't have what we want. The second reason why we think that we suffer is because we need to live situations that we don't want. For example, someone talks to me in a way I don't like. I need to eat something I don't like. I have to do something that I don't like. Or I have to live situations that for which I have aversion. The third reason why we think that we suffer is because we have to be separated from that which we like. Beautiful situations that end, the people that we love, the objects that we love, etc., etc. And if we observe ourselves, we see that practically all of our sufferings, problems, they fall into these three categories. And Buddha said that that's an illusion. It doesn't work like this. Just very quickly, let's analyze. Is it possible to have everything that you want? No. There's a very simple rule. The more I have, the more I want. Imagine how chaotic the world would be if we were able to have everything we wanted. It would be a constant chaos, worse than today. So it's not possible to have everything that we want. So that first suffering of that idea that we are unhappy because we can't have what we want, that's an illusion. And the second one, is it possible to avoid everything we don't want? Is it possible? Shantideva asked, is it possible to cover the entire surface of the world with leather to walk comfortably? No, the only thing you can do is to put on comfortable shoes. So I can't fix all the problems outside, but I can fix myself. So to be happy, not only do should I have everything that I want, but I need to avoid all the things that I and then to avoid the things that I don't like. But even if you avoid everything that's on your list, once you get to the end of the list, you've changed your mind, and things you used to not like now you like them. It's we're strange like this. So is it possible to avoid everything we don't like? No, it's not. Is it possible to not be separated from the things that we love? I mean, regardless of what it is, as soon as it starts, as soon as it arises, it starts to cease. Getting close to death, for example, when does that start? After second, the second moment of conception. There are even those who die before being born. We meet. When does this process, when does this process of having to separate begin? We meet, and then we'll have to be separated. What gathers will then be dispersed. This is the law of how things are. And so this idea of wanting to keep things forever, is it real? Is it possible? Or is it an illusion? It's an illusion, because no matter how much I love someone, no matter how much someone loves me, can we stay together forever? No. No matter how much I like a place, can I be there forever? No. So Buddha said suffering doesn't come from the fact that you can't have what you want, or you need to live what you don't like, or have to be separated from what you love. That's not where suffering comes from. Suffering comes from your unlimited desire. In other words, I don't suffer because I can't have what I want. I suffer because I want what I cannot have. Not because someone doesn't allow me, because I desire something that causes and conditions don't allow. So it's not in that first case where I suffer and I can't have what I want, I'm the victim. In that second case, I suffer because I project onto the world things that I should have, but actually the conditions are not present for it to be so. I'm not a victim. I'm the one who is creating a part of that suffering. And so the solution is within me and not outside. Then we have aversion. It's not true that I suffer because I need to live situations that I don't like. I suffer because I suffer because if I suffer because I have to live situations that I don't like, I'm a victim. The person, the situation, the place, etc. But actually, if I'm suffering because I don't know how to live situations well, and I end up having aversion, fear, resentment for certain situations, I'm the one that is part of that suffering, of creating that suffering. So the solution, it can be found within. And in the third case, it's not true that I suffer because I need to be separated from situations. I suffer because of my ignorance of not being able to see and accept harmoniously the law of interdependence, the law of impermanence. Sorry, the law of impermanence. He said the cause. So suffering comes from this unlimited desire, aversion in all of its forms of hate, resentment, and ignorance. The fact that we see reality in an inconsistent way, For example, if we see someone, in this moment here, we see each other. We close our eyes, or open our eyes again, and we ask ourselves, is that the same person I saw before? Without philosophizing, we'd say, yes. Has that person changed? No. Now, let's see, we see each other after lunch, after in the afternoon, tomorrow, next week. Who do we think we're going to meet? The same person or someone who's changed a little bit? We think that we're going to meet the same person, but can it be the same person? Actually not. So what happens is the person, everything that we see, everything that we interact with, even if it's in constant interaction, impermanent, it appears to us as if it were permanent. And we relate to this impermanent reality as if it were permanent. And this is ignorance. This grasping to impermanent reality as if it were permanent. In other words, ignorance of grasping to the appearance, the permanent appearance of what actually isn't permanent. And what would wisdom be in this case? Seeing that which is impermanent as impermanent. Seems simple. It's not that complicated, but it's really quite hard. Let's not get into the details now. We could spend hours discussing about this, what the inner dynamics, why, etc. But the point is that we relate to an impermanent reality as if it were permanent. This is our ignorance, and we're upset when there are changes. We don't perceive the changes. When we see something, when we see someone, reality appears to us constantly as if we were perceiving things as they are, the reality. We see each other. You think you're seeing me. I think I'm seeing you, right? You can see me, right? But who are you seeing, really? Are you seeing me, or are you seeing your version of me? Otherwise, it's like when someone says, "Oh, Lama, no one understands me." I say, "Well, no one will ever understand you. Don't worry." Because no one will ever see you in the same way that you see yourself. Ever. Never. So do we actually see each other, or do we see our version of each other? Because if each one of you started to give a detailed description of who you see, in me in this case, Lama, how is Lama? What is Lama like? Would there be an identical description among all of you? No. What happens is when we perceive anything, it doesn't have to be a person. It's already quite complex, but anything, the sound of the singing bowl, the flower that's here in front of me, any object. What I perceive is the fruit of this sensory object, my sense faculty, and the sense consciousness, and the value that I give to it. It's very complex, where my perception is different than yours. Even if what I see is not what you see, really, what I see appears to me as being my perception, or as being an objective, independent reality. When I ask you, can you see these flowers? Am I referring to the flowers that I see, that you see, or the flowers that are here? The flowers that are here. Well, it's unfortunate that those don't exist. These flowers that theoretically are here, that go beyond what I perceive and you perceive, this autonomous, independent reality doesn't exist, which doesn't mean that the flowers aren't here. That's another debate. But The point is that in our ignorance, we live a subjective reality that appears to us as being objective. The grasping at this subjective reality as being objective is a form of ignorance. Wisdom would be living a subjective reality as being subjective. So the fundamental cause of our suffering comes from our ignorance that manifests then as selfishness, from which come mental defilements like desire and aversion and fear, etc., from which we then act. And wherever we go, there we are. I've asked this question to children many times. I've asked them, have you ever seen an adult that complains because he's being stressed? And they all say yes, yes. Did it ever happen that you saw this stressed out adult, this adult that's stressed out because of work, and then during vacation, the adult is equally stressed? My question is the adult, is that person stressed because vacationing is stressful, or because that person is always stressed independently of work or of no matter where he is? I mean, there are some people who come to me and they say, Lama, I'd like to take a vacation from myself. Unfortunately, people try by using alcohol or drugs, using things to distance themselves from what they're feeling, and it's maybe even watching a film. I mean, there are certain things that we do just to distance ourselves from our feelings or situations of sufferings. The point is, wherever we go, we bring ourselves with us. And here, there's this joke that I used to tell when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I would go to all the adults, and I would say, everywhere I touch, it hurts. I touch my shoulder, I touch my foot, my nose, my head. It all hurts. And then I ask, what sickness do I have? I said, I have a sickness of my finger, because wherever I touch myself, it hurts. Similarly, I've seen people who are in a situation where they're not well. Maybe they're not respected, or they feel abandoned, or they're not taken care of. They don't have affection. They're alone, they're lonely, and maybe after a lot of effort, they're able to get out of the situation, then they find themselves in a different context. But after a while, what happens? Again, that person feels alone and abandoned. No one loves them. If I can change mountains and mountains, but if I have pink tinted lenses, the snow will always be pink. If I have this identity that I'm a lonely person, I'll see this reality through that filter. And that's where it says all impure phenomenon are of the nature of suffering, that I pollute everything that I see through my dirty filters. I live the world through attachment, dissatisfaction, selfishness, fear, anger, desire, etc. And as long as I have these dirty lenses, I'll see reality accordingly. Dirty. You know, even I'm sure that you could marry a Buddha, a female or male Buddha, perfect being, and it won't work, because one will still bring his own fears, own dissatisfactions, anger, resentments, traumas. Inevitably, we live our world through all of these filters. And as long as these filters through which I perceive reality are dirty, I will live reality accordingly. In other words, as long as I'm taken by selfishness, this obsession with self gratification, this inability to see others, um, to to live life through this filter of I and my that brings us more dissatisfaction, aversion, fear, anxiety. As long as I live the world through this ignorance that we talked about before, inevitably there will be suffering. I can go wherever it is. I can change situations and places and people around me. And with this, I don't mean to say that situations don't influence us, because in this approach, with this view, there are three levels to face situations. And now we're already getting into the part of conduct. But a situation that I'm not able to live well, for example, that first level is if I'm not able to live a situation without reacting with attachment or aversion or fear or whatever generates the suffering within, the first thing I need to do is create distance. But in the awareness, with the awareness that the problem is not within, is not without, but is within, but understanding that I'm not able to work on that if I'm in constant contact with that. Maybe like someone comes and touches me and that hurts me because I have a wound. I know that the problem is not in the person that is caressing me. The problem is in the wound. It hurts because I have a wound, not it hurts not because someone is touching me. But I can't heal the wound if that person keeps touching me. So I need to protect that wound, create some distance, do what I need to do to heal that wound with the awareness that the problem is not in the one who's touching me. Similarly, there's certain situations that we live, and we need to create a distance so that we can avoid that reactive state, so that we can try to heal that wound, look for the right antidote. And that second level is when that wound is already healing and we have more awareness, and we don't need to protect it in all contexts, but we follow the process to deeply heal the wound. And that third level is when we see that our inner dynamics like fear and attachment and desire, etc., that in and of themselves are neither positive nor negative. It depends on how they're used. For example, and this has to do with the Tantra, the Vajrayana Buddhism, desire, for example, and aversion, anger. Let's take these two examples. It's easier to understand using these examples. Desire means I project my happiness onto something, and I do everything possible to obtain that because I believe that that will make me happy. But that attitude in and of itself isn't a problem. The problem is where I'm projecting this attitude. So instead of trying to eliminate desire, desire needs to be redirected. And what about aversion and anger is when we project our aversion onto things that we think are going to the things that make us suffer. So we want to destroy what we think makes us suffer. Um, so, for example, the cause of my wound, the deeper cause of my wound, and not the person who's touching me. It may be like this. Last year, I had a tick, and I left it there, and um, I left it there, and in the end, it got infected. I had to take antibiotics. Um, I needed to see what the actual cause of that wound was. It's not like someone who touched me that I saw them as the problem of my pain, my suffering. So this wanting to um, oppose what we think is making us suffer is not wrong. It just depends on where we're putting our energy. Like in the Bodhisattva Charvatara, it said if someone hits me with a stick on my arm, and and it hurts me, if I got mad at this stick, what would you say to me? They say, no, it's not the stick's fault. So maybe it's the person's hand. No, what about the person's arm? No, no, the person. But what's the primary cause? The person, or the ignorance and the selfishness of that person that brought him to do that. The primary cause is that person's ignorance. So that anger needs to be directed towards the ignorance. And if I direct that anger towards ignorance, I need to find the right way to destroy it. It's through the development of wisdom. And this, for example, in the Vajrayana tradition, we have Yamantaka. Yamantaka is this ferocious being. He's a terrible monster. If you look at the descriptions, ferocious, aggressive, and the representations in the Tibetan Buddhist iconography, they actually seem like cartoons. They seem a little cuter than when the descriptions. I mean, Yamantaka is not playing around. But what does he represent? He represents this destructive force that opposes ignorance. It says, looks at ignorance and says, I don't have any space to be here smiling. I go in direct opposition against ignorance. So when we say that all impure phenomena are of the nature of suffering, and that suffering doesn't come from external conditions, the way we live it, the process has to do also with moving away from what would make us react, to then gradually understand where the wound is and what are the fundamental causes of that wound, so that we can heal it. Often the causes of that wound can also be used differently. For example, I was talking to a doctor, an anthroposophic homeopathic doctor, and he said something very interesting. Let me see if I remember correctly. He said that sicknesses actually, it's not something that's not going well. These are actual, um, they're actually, it's a manifestation of a quality that you're not using correctly, and that shows up as a sickness. That's one view. And if we take that idea, similarly, suffering is caused by not knowing how to use aversion and attraction correctly, because these two strengths, these two powers exist in us. So changing this view, when we go to a view where when I suffer, what's around me is not the cause of my suffering, but it's just the condition. The primary cause is my own behavior, my attachment, my envy, my fear, my etc., getting all the way to ignorance. That's the second seal. The third seal says all phenomenon lack their own identity and lack an intrinsic and lack intrinsic nature. And that means that we live in a subjective reality. Everything that exists exists through a complex interdependence. Nothing exists detached from everything else. And here we could spend days and days and days talking about this, which we're not going to do. But in essence, and this is one of the most important point within Buddhism. All 4 points are important, but this one shows us that reality is not something detached and autonomous. There is no one single reality that each one sees differently. They, for example, big and small. Is this singing bell big or small? And you're without the fear of saying something, saying the wrong thing. It's big. Why is it big? Because it's in relation to singing bowls we've seen in the past. It's larger. Normally, a singing bowl is smaller, so we call this big. But if I put a singing bowl that's 3 times larger, then it would be the small singing bowl. And if we put one that's even smaller, it would be the middle-sized one. So big and small, they don't exist in an objective, autonomous way. Being big or being small exists exclusively in relation to something else, not in an autonomous way. And similarly, everything exists in a reciprocal dependence. This exists as it interacts with this, that, and the other. It's this very complex network that we live in. And if I move one part, I'm moving the whole, everything that's connected there within. Interdependence is one of the most important points when we look at Buddhist view. We look at Buddhism, has to do with the first seal, that first level interdependence of cause and conditions, that everything depends on its parts and is made up of many small parts. This shows us that we just need to change one small part to be able to change the whole. And not only is it possible, it's the only way. It's the only way to change the whole is by changing a part. If I want to live in a different society, well, given that I am part of that society, if I change myself, I'm changing society. Another fundamental point is that external reality exists, but external reality doesn't exist independently from our internal reality. The inner reality doesn't exist independently from external reality. An example of this is, can we hear the sound of the singing bowl? Yes, right? But now, this sound of the singing bowl that I hear, does it exist independently from my mind that perceives it? The sound that I hear, not the sound that you hear, but the sound that I'm hearing, is a fruit of the value that I give to it. This my hearing consciousness, the vibrations that came to my actual sense faculties, my hearing doesn't exist independently from my mind that perceives it. I'm not talking about the mind in general. I'm talking about the specific moment, that specific part of the mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. So the sound that I hear doesn't exist independently from my mind that perceives it. Are you following? My mind that perceives the sound of the singer bowl, does it exist without the sound of the singing bowl, or does it depend on the sound of the singing bowl to exist? We're not talking about the mind in general, that specific mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. Can it exist without the sound of the singing bowl? Try to imagine the mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. No, we can perceive the memory of the sound of the singing bowl, but for there to be the mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl, we need the sound of the singing bowl. So the mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl and the sound of the singing bowl, they're mutually dependent. One doesn't exist without the other. If there's one, then there is the other. They're mutually dependent. They're not the same thing, but they're of the same nature in the sense that if there's one, then the other is present, and vice versa. So the reality that we live in every moment, it exists, and there are no doubts, but it doesn't exist independently from all its interactions. And among all the interactions, there's also the observer. So what I see, what I perceive is not the reality. It's the reality as I perceive it. Even colors, for example. If we were to take, for example, green and red, here, for example, these two colors, green and red, and if I asked you, are they different or very similar? No, they're different. Why? Because we see them as being different, or because they are different? They're different. Green is green. Green is green and red is red, and we wouldn't say that it's a question of interpretation. No, for us they're very different. One day I was walking in the woods, and Sylvia, the veterinarian, said, "For you, it's easier. It's easy to take to hide in the woods because um, it's easy for the dog to not see you because you're dressed as red and the woods are green, and for the dog there's not much difference between these two colors." And so I ask you, are they different because they're different, or because they're different because of according to our sense faculties, and those light frequencies are perceived in a different way as human beings. I mean, we perceive reality through our senses, but what's the reality? That's this reality according to these senses. Because if you change your senses, reality then also changes. It's not the reality that exists. Even colors. Even colors are not objective, but subjective. So we live in a subjective reality that is interdependent, even with the relationship with the observer. And this shows us, one of the things it shows us is that in every moment, in every instant, on everything, let's take this object here, this singing bowl. In this object, in this moment, there are innumerable possibilities. How many different things can this object be? Many, no? It's easy. It's easy to use to find many different functions to this object. It can be a singing bowl. It can be a weapon. It can be a vase for flowers. It can be a dish for dog food. It can be it, it can be used during the night if you don't want to get up and go to the bathroom. So it can be many, many things, and we choose one thing, but we're not aware that we're choosing one among many possibilities, we think that the one that we're choosing is the reality of its existence. So, what Buddha says in this third seal is there's no one reality that everyone interprets. Reality in and of itself is um, is interdependent and subjective and of infinite choice. So what happens is we relate to things and to ourselves. We relate with people, with situations, and even with ourselves through labels, through mental images. We say, I am this, I am that, this is this, that is that. And what's particular is that when we label something, we believe that thing is what is written then. Like saying, that, imagine you buy a product and in the, on the label is written a name. Is it what's inside, or you believe what it's written in outside? Theoretically, it's what's inside, but we give a lot of weight to what's written. We say, oh, but that's not written there. And in the same way, we attribute names, like the story I've told many times about the soup. I said that I didn't like soup, and then one day I had really delicious soup. I finished my bowl and I wanted more. But what did I do? I don't have more because I don't like soup. Or rather, I put a label on that says I don't like soup. And that label that I've put, that idealized image, is worth more worth more than my own experience. And I could put many labels onto you. Maybe some others have put on, and then you embody those. For example, I have a generalized aversion to all um, the physical exercise. Sport is painful. I have this label. Then I walk for kilometers and I really enjoy it. But I have to convince myself that that's not exercise. Otherwise, I won't do it because I don't like exercise sport. We're strange. But what happens is we give more value to the label than to our actual experience, and not only for ourselves but for others. Maybe you maybe you're with someone who acts differently from the label that you had given him. Oh, that person's not like this. He's acting in this way, but that's not him. It's strange. When we talk about this point, one key is understanding that, wanting or not, we relate to everything, including ourselves, through an idealized image, label. But this label is nothing other than a name that has been given. And a very basic example, what determines a person, what makes a person a liar? What does one need to do? What characteristics determine a person being a liar? One needs to lie, right? But how many times does someone need to lie to have that certification of being a liar? How many times? In your opinion? Once? If it's one, then we all have that label. One needs to lie, maybe 50% of what they say needs to be false. What's the percentage? We don't know. Actually, maybe the one maybe the one that we don't really like, and um, we we've heard him tell a lie, so that person's a liar. And what about being sincere person? Do you have to be sincere all the time to be a sincere person? If that's the case, then there are no sincere people here. If you're a sincere person, have you ever told a lie? Okay, you're not sincere anymore. The truth, from my point of view, from what I've understood, is that there aren't liars and there aren't sincere people. There are people who tell lies and people who tell the truth, because we are a constant flow of thoughts, emotions, and we do so many contradictory things. So we're not one specific thing. It's obvious that if I take one moment where that person is lying and I take a photograph of that person, I say, well, you are a liar because you are lying. But then later, um, and then I take a photograph of that person later when that person is telling the truth. No, you're a sincere person. No, you are someone who sometimes lies, or there are those who lie more, sometimes those who lie less. Or am I a happy person or am I someone who suffers? Am I a happy person or a sad person? Neither one nor the other. I'm a person with moments of joy and moments of sadness. Have you ever met someone who is always happy? I- Always happy? I've never met anyone like that. Someone who's always sad? I haven't met anyone like that either. So is this a happy person or a sad person? A person has moments of sadness, moments of happiness and joy. So for me, an important job to do, effort to put is to take away these labels. And you can label instead the feelings, the thoughts, or the actions, the value. So this word is a lie. This is a sincere message. I agree, but the person is not one thing or another. And this third seal brings us to the fact that and it brings us to an idea that we live in a world that's in constant transformation, but we have this tendency of taking static photographs and applying labels to those static moments. We need to remind ourselves that everything instead is in constant transformation. Has it ever happened that you've looked at yourself in the mirror or a photograph and you say, "Oh, look how much I've changed." When I took a photo with a drone and I realized how much I had changed, and when I saw that, I said, "Oh, how wonderful! I'm alive." We can be upset, maybe, "Oh, look how much I've changed," because had because in our minds we had the previous photograph. And that's the same with everything. So one job to do is to apply this updating of mental images, to update the and recognize that the value that I attribute to something, the photograph that I take, is a value that I give to something in one moment. When we take a photograph, does that the one who takes the photograph shows what is photographed, but also shows the point of view of the photographer. I mean, maybe you could also see what kind of camera you're using, what kind of film, or how much all the technical aspects of the photograph, all the filters used, and the positioning, what lens was used, that all changes. So we can take the same object and we take the same object and we all take our own photograph. We'll have different photos. So in your photographs, do you see only the object that's been photographed or all the choices and the influence of the photographer, of the one taking the photograph? That's all present too. And in the same way, inside, when we take a photograph of a person, of a situation, or of ourselves, there's not just the object that is photographed, but there's also the photographer. So, so if I take a photograph of you one day where you're nervous, what is going to stay in my mind? That nervousness. Or if I take a photo and if I take a photo and I'm nervous, that's going to influence everything I see. And in the same way, if I'm very sensitive and relaxed, or maybe a day I'm very much in love and I see a situation, I can say, "Oh, how wonderful that photograph is not made only of the object, but also of the subject, the one taking the photo." But after time, the object changes, and also the subject, the one taking, seeing the object, is changing as well. So we need to remember that photos are just photos. It's a moment that was a moment of the object and of the subject, but it's not one or the other. And but we are not able to relate with ourselves as a person, as with a situation, if not through the photos that we've taken. And our ignorance shows us, our ignorance tells us that photo is reality. And as long as that photo corresponds to the experience of the now, more or less, we say, okay. But that also closes up any kind of possibility to see things differently. And we stay fixed and grasp at the idea that it is like that. What about the fourth seal? It's very important, even if it's set aside sometimes. The fourth seal says, beyond suffering, there's peace, which means that we all inevitably, we have the possibility of reaching nirvana. We have the possibility to reach a deep state of peace. We all have this potential. What Buddha reached, we can reach that too. It's not that you can and you cannot. No, we all have this ability, this capability. And it's fundamental because it's said that I need to have faith in Buddha, but I need to have faith also in myself. It's like if I go to a doctor because I'm sick, it's not enough to have faith in the doctor and the treatment. I need to believe that I can heal. If I don't believe that I can heal, I'll never put the necessary effort into the process. Once I heard a doctor that talked in a conference. He was talking about some research study. He took many people who were sick from the same tumor, and they were able to heal from this tumor, and even after like 5-10 years it hadn't come back. So they all had the same tumor. They healed, and the tumor didn't come back. And they looked at all the different treatments used, and they saw that there were many different kinds of treatment. Traditional Chinese medicine, chemotherapy, many different kinds of treatment. So the question was, what is in common? Because the sickness was the same and the result is the same, but the treatment, it was apparently different. What was in common? And they went looking for what was in common, and their conclusion was the only a common factor among all the patients who were able to heal with different techniques is that they were completely sure that the treatment they were following was the right one. There was no other common factor. This doesn't mean that those treatments are valid or not valid. What I'm saying is that in the healing process, regardless of the level that we're talking about, the fundamental aspect is believing that we can be healed. This is fundamental on so many levels. From on a very simple level, if I don't believe it, I'm not going to put effort. And there are other levels, but in this process of going beyond one's own suffering and reaching a state of love and balance and wisdom, at the basis we need the trust, the belief that we can do it. And the fourth seal talks about this. It doesn't say, oh no, you can't do it because you've done this, that, and the other. No. In Buddha's life, there are examples of people who had a horrible conduct before coming into contact with Buddhism. Two cases in particular. One of Angulimala, who had killed 999 people, and another was the Makyeda, the king who had killed his own parents. Long stories, making them short. They're both able to reach nirvana in that lifetime and changing their behavior, etc. They're able to actually change, purify what they had generated and reach a state of peace and happiness. These are two examples that are used. Among all the terrible things that they did, they were able to overcome it. Milarepa himself, there at the entrance above, high above, 1, 2, 3, the fourth one, seated. The body is a little bit blue-green with the hand near his ear. That's the representation of Milarepa. Milarepa is known today, is recognized today as is one of the greatest meditators and holy men of Tibet. And at the beginning of his life, he killed hundreds of people with black magic. And there's a whole story behind it where he generated a tremendous hatred for his uncle who for his uncle who treated him terribly. He learns black magic, and he created a kind of storm, a black magic, and killed most of the village. And then he saw that brought him nothing but a deep void within. And at a certain point, he comes into contact with the Dharma. He looks for someone who helps him get out of his suffering, and he meets Marpa. He sees great potential, but first he needed to take away that burden that he had created by his past actions, and so he had him do a very heavy purification practice. He needed to build many houses and then destroy them. he would try to come in for teachings, and he would chase him away in a very terrible, it's a very hard way. He tried to kill himself many times. It was a very, very heavy process of purification. And then one day he was able to transcend that weight. And at that point, Marpa called him and to teach him, and he taught him meditation techniques. He went to meditate in the mountains. He was very poor. He would eat the he would eat nettles. That's why his body is a little bit green, because it's said that years and years of eating only nettles, that his body was actually a little bit green. And even if it was very, very cold, he dressed with a very light cotton. He was able to manage his inner temperature, let's say. And towards the end of his life, he manifested marvelous qualities. This is another example that we can all make it. The real problem is not having the basis, but walking in the right direction instead. This fourth seal says we can all do it. We can all make it. There's also a nice story, two nice stories that go together. Two disciples. One was in India, one in Tibet. They both, the first part of the story is the same. Disciples who weren't the smartest, didn't understand the teachings well. They were a little bit behind, and everyone is understood, and they're still not understanding. And they all they were treated a little bit like the way you would have a child play with you, but you know that they're not actually participating. So they were there, but they weren't seen as being capable. The first one day went to his master. They both go to the master as the master's about to leave for a trip. So they're there in line to say goodbye. And in that moment, which is like the worst moment to ask anything from your master, he said, "What's the practice of my life?" And in a very affectionate way, he made a joke and he said, "Your nose looks like a rudra. A rudraksha is a kind of seed that's very porous. That's they're used to make malas. It's very porous. So this person had a very porous nose, and said, "Your nose looks like a rudra." In India, so that was in Sanskrit. I mean, they were speaking Hindi. Um, so after a couple, he said, "Thank you, master." And then, so he came back after some time, and 1, 2 years later, he said, "Well, what happened to that disciple?" And then nobody knew. One day, this master, he got very sick. He had a terrible infection in his lungs, and they weren't able to help him. And someone said, "Master, in the village, I heard about a very good healer. Everyone's going to him. Shall we try?" He said, "Oh, yes, so why not?" So they called the doctor, they called this healer, and he arrived, and as he got close to him, he said, "You look familiar. It's strange." And he got close to him, and he started reciting, "Your nose is like your nose looks like a rudra, your nose looks like a rudra." And he understood that it was that disciple, the one that had made that joke, but he had taken it seriously, and he had spent all this time accumulating mantra. Your nose looks like a mantra, and who knows, maybe millions of times. And with the faith that he had, he developed powers of healing. He remembered that. He started laughing. He just burst out laughing, and he was able to get rid of all of that deeply embedded infection and pus in his lungs. So the determination and the faith and the consistency has a tremendous power. And in the other case, the disciple asked the same question. This is in Tibet. The first one was in India. This is in Tibet. And he asked the master, "What's the practice of my life?" And the master makes the joke and he says, "Meditate until a horn grows on your head." And if someone says something to you like that, it's a joke. But instead, he took it seriously. And the master came back from this long trip. He didn't see his disciple. Time goes by. He asks about him. No, no, I haven't seen him, haven't seen him. More time goes by, maybe 3 years. And then they said, "Go and look for him. I want to see how he is, what's happened, if he's fine." They went looking for him, and they went to the village, and in the village they said, "He's meditating in the mountains." And the master said, "No, you go and find him." It took 3 days to go to the mountains to find his cave. And here he was he was meditating in a cave with a big horn on his head. They 3 days back to the master and says, "He's meditating, he has a horn on his head." And he said, "Oh, I understand. Tell him to come back." So they went back to him, 3 more days walking. They said, the master says to come back to him. He says, "I'm not able to get out of the cave because this big horn is keeping me in the cave." They went back to the master and, "Okay, tell him that he needs to meditate until that horn disappears, and then come back to me." Then so they got back to him, and after 3 days, he was able to have that horn disappear because he had developed such a strong level of concentration. And the one who wasn't able to understand anything actually became the disciple of who was the quickest of them all and was able to have great realizations. So often, being particularly intelligent is not doesn't always work in our favor, because one relaxes in one's ability. As long as you're able, you don't put more effort. This happens. So it shows that regardless of one's level, intellectual, spiritual, whatever it is, it's possible for everyone. There's no one that can say, "No, I'm not able." So this fourth seal reminds us that we can all make it, and really highlights the importance of the faith and the trust that we have in ourselves. We can reach a state of peace and develop love and wisdom. And this is a fundamental point for good self-esteem. And this is all part of the fourth seal. We live in an impermanent reality where every action determines what we experience, and nothing comes from nothing. As long as we will have these mental defilements, we will live things badly. So suffering is not caused by external things, but by internal conditions. We live in an interdependent reality where nothing exists in an autonomous, independent way, but exists in this interdependence among everything, and each one of us has the possibility, the ability to reach this state beyond the suffering, this state of peace and wisdom. This is the basis. So this is the view, and this opens up another door, conduct. And in conduct, we say, "I want to follow this road. What should I do? I want to follow this path." What we need to do is a path that is made of 1 plus 6. So first we need to develop the first and then start training in the other 6 aspects. The first one is divided into 2. So we've got the 0.5 plus zero point 0.5 makes 1. First we need to love ourselves and love others. First I learn to love myself. It's the first part of the path because I can't project onto others what I don't want for myself. So the first step along the path is loving oneself. Having clarity of what I want, having faith in oneself, desiring deeply to get out of one's suffering, to reach a state of happiness, seeing that our suffering comes from our own mental defilements and desiring, wanting to get out of that cycle of suffering. And essentially, it's recognizing what is good for us and what is and cultivating it and avoiding what is bad for us. And then we expand that. Bodhicitta is called, this mind of enlightenment, this feeling of opening up our heart towards others, the development of love, altruism, compassion. This is the first one, loving oneself and loving others. We need to cultivate this, our way of speaking, our way of interacting, our way of thinking. In the end, it's just fundamental, remembering that no one reaches something from one day to the next. It's always a gradual process, one piece at a time. So in every meeting, in every word, every thought, I gradually cultivate one aspect or another. Once I've developed that first one, love towards myself and love towards others, then I start the 6 paramitas. The paramita is something I already am, but something I need to go beyond. Parchin in Tibetan. Par is beyond, and chin is having gone or going beyond. So we all start from where we are, and we want to get to the other side of the riverbank. The first is generosity. We need to perfect this generosity that we already have and take it beyond the limited generosity to an unlimited generosity. So we practice generosity. The second one is morality, our ability to do what's good for us and avoid what's detrimental, to respect the commitments that we take on. Ethics has to do with what should be done and what we shouldn't do, what's right and what's wrong. And we can spend months and days, months talking about it. Morality is easier. Morality has to do with my ability to put into practice the ethics that I follow. So what is beneficial, I cultivate it, and what I consider negative, I avoid it. And the second training, so first is generosity, and the second training is morality. The third is patience. Our ability to not react with aggression in front of objects of anger. And patience has other have other subtleties, to not lose joy, not lose the joy in front of difficulties. Patience is about not losing one's balance in front of difficulties. Generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic effort. Enthusiastic effort is our ability to put energy into what is virtuous but difficult. Put energy into what is good but not easy. This means having joy, feeling joy in what is positive but not easy. Shantideva described it as effort, Sun Kang, Sundru, Kang. What is it? So Sun Kang, what is effort? Gela Trawao, that which is good, la, to, trowa, joy and happiness. Feeling joy for joy in virtue. Virtue makes reference to actions that bring about that bring about happiness and well-being. So enthusiastic effort to cultivate is our ability to put effort in that which is positive but not necessarily easy. This is enthusiastic effort. Then the fifth quality that we need to train in our conduct, which is concentration, developing more and more our ability to direct our mind with awareness of where we want to go. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's interesting because it's said that to develop concentration well, first we need at least to have a little generosity, morality, patience, and enthusiastic effort. If you don't have the base of these four, then you don't have the necessary positive karmic force to sustain a good concentration. If you don't have morality, then you won't be able to abandon negative negativities. If you don't have that patience, you won't be able to maintain that balance in front of interferences that appear. And without enthusiastic effort, after 3 minutes, one abandons and says that they're not able to do it. So to cultivate concentration, you need generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic effort, and to develop concentration. All of these five are the basis of developing wisdom. Wisdom means seeing reality consistently with as it is. So a Buddhist practitioner in the so-called Mahayana path, what should he do in his lifetime? What makes up his practice and his conduct? Cultivating physically, verbally, and mentally love towards oneself and others, and then generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. And that's what the path is made up of. And to do these things, there's the part of meditation. So one goes to learn other meditation techniques, follows sadhanas, recites mantras, uses all the tools necessary. So if someone asked me what is Buddhism, it's that's a worldview based on these 4 points that manifests in a coherent conduct where I don't project my happiness outside but within. I don't project the cause of my suffering as outside, but I see it as caused from within, and I put effort to cultivate my qualities, and as a consequence I diminish my negativities, and I practice the 6 perfections. And I have techniques that help me do this with whole sacred art, meditation, Vajrayana practices like the sadhanas, practices like self-healing, reciting mantras, prayers, karma yoga. There are many different things that I can use as tools along this path. And Buddhism is the whole, is all of this put together. So it's up to you. the up to you to decide if it's a religion for you or not. In my point of view, yes, it is. But the because the concept of religion is much greater than what we normally consider a religion. But what's important, it's not important to be Buddhist. We instead we need to develop our qualities to be better with ourselves and better with others. If we find within the teachings of Buddhas a connection, we find it coherent with what we want. Buddha himself said, when you get to the other side of the riverbank, don't grasp to your mode of transport, to your um, and for sure, um, you I mean, our objective is to get to the other side of the river. So it's once you've gotten to that other side, you don't need your boat anymore, and you certainly don't need to compare your means of transport, your boat, to someone else. What's important is getting to reaching our objective. So So be less focused on being or not being Buddhist, but focus more on the transformation of this worldview and our conduct, and use the valid tools to help us do this. At the end of the day, I don't think the world would be a better world if it were a Buddhist world. I think the world would be better if there were more awareness, more love, more respect, more kindness. That's where we should all put effort, in my opinion. That's all for today. I'd like to make a request. If there's something that was said today um, that you found beneficial, try to put it into practice. Remember it, write it, think about it, direct your mind in that direction. The six perfections is the basis. Um, so take the six perfections and dedicate one to every day. Okay, today's my day for generosity. I mean, if we just leave everything in a general way, we'll get lost. It's important to be practical. It's important to define how we practice, and remember that this spiritual practice, this growth, this development of our qualities, is not here in the temple, here in the at the Buddhist center also, but it's also found when we're with our family, when we're at work, when we're alone, in our daily lives. So if we really want to follow our practice, we can't make a distinction between my work life, my family life, my spiritual life. The spiritual path should show in every aspect of our lives. It's very important to remember. Once Lama, then we never relax. No. If by to relax you mean just setting our path aside, no. No, we can relax along our path, within our path. It's time for our dedications.
Kutse rapten chin namkar chinle chokchur gepadang losan tempe dreme sasum ki drove munsela taktu ne gyur chi shide simcho rimpoche make panama ke gyur chi kepa nyampar me payang Kongne conto pelwar sho. Possa la preziosa
May the peaceful mind that has not yet arisen arise and grow. Maybe that one who has already arisen continue to grow forevermore.
Yinsen taktu delek pe koncho sumki chingi lom, koncho sumki ngodrubot sol, koncho sumki trashishon.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and help us to receive all
Grazie a tutti, buon appetito.
have a good lunch. Today, this afternoon, there will be the ceremony of the taking of refuge at 4:30. Normally it's 3:30, but today it's 4:30, and if you don't know what to do in the meantime, take a nice walk in the woods, I suggest.